Welcome to Level with Emily Reese. This is a conversation with composer Phill Boucher, and he's going to talk about his music for the new Apple Arcade castle defense game called HEROish. Now, Phill describes the music as Celtic Metal Plus. So yes, there's electric guitar in there, but mostly orchestral with an abundance of Celtic instruments like uilleann pipes, Irish whistles and flutes. There's a lot of violin. There's even a contrabassoon solo, and contrabassoon represents one of the characters, which all of the solo instruments do represent a character in the game because you get to choose which character you play in HEROish. In any event, we talk about that. We also talk about these amazing score videos that Phill has up on his YouTube page, where he shows like snippets of the score so you can follow along if you read music, and it's really fun to see those. And he's got a HEROish one, and he also has several Fortnite ones up, as Phill is one of the prolific Fortnite composers. So in any event, we pretty much stick to HEROish for this conversation, and it was great to hear about all of the various instruments that he used and an orchestra in Vienna, which is very, very cool. Let's see, please do join us on Discord to talk about this and other episodes and things game-related and not game-related, but always wholesome and fun. Link is in the show notes. It does not cost you anything to get access to our Discord server. Please do subscribe to this YouTube channel. Now, you won't hear music in this YouTube video. We constantly get yanked for copyright violations if we do that, so we don't put music in the YouTube videos. You need to listen to the audio version of the podcast to do that, and you can find that podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and again, no cost, no pay barrier to any of that. And so yeah, subscribe here to this YouTube channel, join us on Discord, and if you're able to become a patron and support us financially, that would be amazing. Or if you're feeling generous and doing it on behalf of someone who can't afford it, also very grateful. So that website is patreon.com/level. All right, let's get to Phill Boucher talking about HEROish.
My name is Phill Boucher. I'm the composer of HEROish. HEROish is a new game for Apple Arcade. It is a kind of a spin on the classic tower defense game. You spawn a hero. You have one of 6 heroes to choose from. You have a deck of cards that you can upgrade, and you summon troops to kind of fight alongside you, going through different kind of medieval areas. There's like a more of a graveyard kind of area. There's more of a foresty area, and then like the traditional high fantasy castles and catapults sort of thing. Interesting cast of characters of animals and knights and wolves and all sorts of different things. Yeah, I don't know if I'm really doing justice to what the game is, but
yeah. I mean, it's really colorful and funny and adorable, all those things, and very fantasy, and the music is fantastic. Like you can tell it's real instruments and just like fun instrumentation. So I'd love to know, because there is some really special instrumentation with the uilleann pipes, and the violinist is fantastic. Other Irish flutes and pipes and things. Contrabassoon, I swear to God, there's like a contrabassoon solo at one point, which is great.
There is.
Yeah, so we're going to talk about all of that stuff, but I would love to know, like, when you first started writing music, was it how much direction were you given from the developers in terms of sound, or were these your pitches in terms of sound?
Well, it's interesting. I was given sort of clear direction that I instantly started steering them away from, which is, I mean, it's a dangerous line, right? Like I wasn't trying to say your idea is bad. It was the initial pitch to me from them was that they wanted sort of a Celtic metal score. And like, I grew up with metal music, and I was in a metal band, and like all the music I listened to when I was in high school came from Europe, if it was any good. And so like, I understood the language of it, and I was excited about it, but it's so limiting. There's only the Crayola box is very small, like the amount of colors that you have to work with. So I started using this term Celtic Metal Plus with them, just to kind of pitch them on this idea of, we can have those elements, but you don't actually want this to sound like a metal album when you're done. You want it to sound like a score, and you want it to sound like the score for your game. So once they started talking about all these different heroes and they want different instruments to represent all the different heroes, then we also have the sort of the three main areas of the game that also need their own instrumentation. Like, that's a big scope to cover with guitar and drums and bass and, you know, maybe a couple extra things. So that was my sort of reactive pitch to them, was let's incorporate the spirit of Celtic metal, and we'll have, I mean, if you've listened to the score, you've heard, like, there's moments where we go for it, but there's a lot of times where, you know, the flavor is there, but we're doing other things as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and I'm obviously I neglected to mention the electric guitar, because that is, I mean, that's like a plot piece, right? So it's important to have had the electric metal guitar going on.
Total. And that was something I said to them. It's like, there's no danger of not having the shred guitar. It's it's your main villain, right? Like, it's in the score, it's in the plot. Same with the violin. Like, we're going to have these elements because you've written them into the story. So don't worry about it. And we can always find the balance if we don't go far enough or we go too far. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, let's talk about the violinist then, because there's some really great stuff in there, and I assume you handpicked the player too. So talk to me about that choice.
I knew it was going to be important, and I didn't have there was no instant person that came to mind. So I really started to just scour through YouTube and ask friends of mine just around town, like, who do we know? Who's sort of the classically trained, but maybe not the like first chair violinist in the orchestra, like someone that has some additional influences and likes other styles of music and can improvise and just can do interesting things. And so I found this woman, Luann Holmesy, who is just phenomenal. I found this video of her, and she was just like shredding this like gypsy jazz solo, and it was unbelievable. And just like the way she was moving when she was playing, she was standing up. It felt very fluid, and it just instantly felt like the character of Lavinia. And I sent the video off to Eric Harms, who is the audio director, and he's like, that's her. And the video started circling around, and it was instant. Everyone's just like, of course that's who it is.
Huh, nice. Yeah. I mean, she has an absolutely beautiful tone, and you give her so many different ways to shine too, musically, right? Like there's, I hate bringing up my browser and making my face wash out like that. But excuse me, Dreamer's Dirge is a bit of a slower kind of, obviously dirge, but it just really lets her sound and lyricism shine.
Yeah, and that was actually one of the later pieces that I wrote, because I started writing before I knew who was going to play it. So that's just the nature of things, right? Like you've got to start writing, and then you, once you have your cast, then you can start tweaking things. So some things, I started writing harder music, let's put it that way, once I knew that it was going to be her, because she can just play anything. Yeah. So that piece was an example of sort of the opposite, where we could expose the violin, just put it out there and let it be the thing that drives the whole piece. Because I wasn't worried about, we're not going to get a good player and we have to kind of hide her behind some of the programming and the other stuff. Mm-hmm. I'm really glad you called out that piece, because it's a favorite of mine for sure.
Oh yeah, I loved that piece a lot. And also what's fun, going back for just a half a second to the electric guitar, which I think we'll talk about a few different times today, but I love how the score, you hold off on it, right? You don't hear it until you meet that character, and you like see this weapon at the beginning of the game that's like a guitar, and then you don't actually hear the guitar until the character actually shows up. I thought that was great.
That's right. And there's actually a clever thing that we did, because for each campaign, you can choose between one of two heroes. And so when you're doing the Cursed campaign, you can either be Lavinia or Marduk, who's the guy with the guitar. And all of those tracks, depending on which character you choose, it swaps out the instrument. So if you play those levels as Marduk, and all of those violin lines go away, and it's a guitar instead.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to observe that. That's awesome. It actually, I want to talk about these score videos you do because these are fun and great. And I found them on your Twitter feed, but you can go to your YouTube as well. You've got like, I don't know, a dozen or so up of these score videos. Will you talk about those?
Yeah. I had my assistant kind of just go through and put up some of this stuff because just me as a music fan, I love watching other people's when I've seen them before. And I was trying to figure out a way to put some of my music out there that wasn't just a still image, or like, how can I do something that's at least a little bit different or something educational? I don't know. I was just trying to think of different ways to put stuff out there. So some of them are like captures from a piano roll where you can see like the MIDI blocks, and some of it is actual score notation. I don't always have score notation if we don't record with the live orchestra or something, but for the ones that we do, it's really cool to show that off.
Yeah, it's so cool. And one of my favorite things about the HEROish one is exactly what you call out, is how the soloists embellish the lines that you wrote. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, that was interesting because they weren't all in the same place at the same time. So when we made the score video, it was putting these things back together, which was actually the first time that I ever saw the notation for the soloists at the same time as the orchestra, because they just existed in different PDF files.
Sure.
But yeah, it's really cool to look at it and just, I see MIDI notes all day long. So whenever it turns back into notation, it's interesting. And it's like, I find myself looking at it and like, does that look like music, or does that look like, is someone going to call me out and say, oh, he shouldn't have written that note or something? Like it's it becomes so much more legitimate and unforgiving once it's in notation. But I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Really fun to see that. Let's step away from HEROish for just a moment and talk a little bit about your background. I saw you're a trumpet player, which is what I grew up playing. So let's geek out about that for a moment. Did you start at a traditional age, like 10 years old-ish, something like that?
Well, I'm going to disappoint you that I am no longer a trumpet player.
I don't really call myself a trumpet player either, to be honest.
Yeah, I can't remember exactly what age, but it was grade school. I think in like first or second grade, you play the recorder. Everyone gets the little plastic recorder. And then the year after that, there was band, and everyone had to just pick an instrument. And I can't remember if I was assigned the trumpet or I picked the trumpet, but I liked it. I wasn't growing up in a classical household. My parents aren't musicians. I didn't really have much exposure to the orchestra. So in some ways I had this instrument, but I didn't really have a relationship to it outside of the music that I was playing. And I think that's maybe part of why it never really stuck. Like I like practicing and I was good at it, and I would play. And when I used to go to church, or I like go to some like scholarship competitions and things, but it never fully felt like the right thing for me.
But then you started guitar, right? As well?
Yeah. So I started guitar, I guess it was probably 12 or 13, towards the end of middle school. And I had a friend that was also playing the guitar at the same time. So we just get together and write terrible songs and play. But I never had that with the trumpet. I never had someone else that we were just enjoying playing the music together. So I think that had a big impact on it that I never really thought about, that we just get together and play. And it's a lot easier. You couple guys with the guitar, you find someone that plays the drums, and then suddenly you've got something to do on the weekends, and you just get together and play music.
And you did that all through high school, played in bands?
Yeah, I did. And I started to do, I went to Berklee College of Music in Boston, and they have a summer program there that I did a couple of times, where you go for 5 weeks and you meet incredible musicians that show you that you'll never be at that level. And, and you start learning about all the different other parts of music besides just playing. But yeah, I mean, I don't know why I went off on that tangent, but it was just all throughout high school, like music just became like a pretty important part of my life.
But the guitar side of it, right? Not so much trumpet. Yeah. And so
no,
when
trumpet was gone. Trumpet was gone by then.
Oh, wow. Really? Okay. So you played just a little bit when you were younger, and that was it.
By the time I was in high school, I probably stopped touching the trumpet.
Oh, wow. Okay. So when you went to Berklee, it was guitar all the way.
Absolutely.
Cool.
I told you I was going to disappoint you.
No, that's not a disappointment at all. I'm always fascinated by people, composers' paths to composition because, you know, do you sit at a keyboard when you compose or do you sit at a guitar or does it depend probably?
Well, now most of the time I sit at a keyboard. It's just, especially dealing with MIDI, it's just sort of the easiest way to write.
Sure.
I've got a wall of guitars over there and I'll pick them up and I'll add them. And sometimes I'll start with them if I know it's going to be a very guitar driven piece. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the things that I'm doing, if it's going to be anything orchestral, I just find it easier to visualize it at the keyboard than on a guitar.
Yeah. How do you think it influences you as a composer to have I mean, I don't even know if it's fair to say that that's your point of reference then. You know, I mean, I just am curious to dig in a little more about, you know, where the inspiration comes from, you know?
I think that it influences me more than I realize. You know, I listen back to some of the rhythms that I come up with and just the way that I construct a piece. And sometimes it's more like riff based with some of the low strings and things. It's definitely just in the DNA of what I write because for so long, that's what I was listening to. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, a lot of the metal music and the stuff that I grew up with was itself classically influenced. So it's sort of like a circular thing where some of the lines that come out of me, even though they are probably like from something I listened to when I was 16, they got it from some 19th century classical piece or something. So there's some way that it all kind of folds back into the orchestra.
Yeah, no kidding. Oh, that's really fascinating. Yeah, let's go back to HEROish for a sec because we mentioned that contrabassoon solo, and I'd love to hear more about that. You don't hear a lot of contrabassoon in games.
No, and I'm glad you pointed that out because when we had these early discussions, I mentioned that they wanted an instrument for each hero. One of the characters is this character Bolvi, who's this giant bear. And he's in this the Feral campaign. And the Feral campaign, there's no metal anywhere. It's all like wood-based instruments and small flutes and drums and like organic things. And a lot of it was kind of meant to be things you could carry and things that you could just have out in the forest if you were a bear or a rodent. You know, like you're using your imagination, but at the same point, like there's some logic to how this all gets constructed. And so for Bolvi, I was like, I think it would be just sort of interesting to do. The contrabassoon is the lowest instrument in the orchestra. It goes lower than a tuba. And when's the last time you ever heard like a featured solo on a contrabassoon? Right. And I happen to know this amazing player, Anthony Parther, and he's a phenomenal player. And I found this video of him doing like a concerto. And it was a piece for solo contrabassoon. And it kind of gave me some ideas of where we could go with it. But at the same time, like I had to sell them on that one because the samples weren't quite working. And I was like, I think this is going to work. I wasn't even fully convinced. I said, I think this is going to work. It's worth pursuing because it's interesting. It's kind of weird. So we brought him in early on to kind of do a test on one of the tracks, which ended up being the Feral map music. If you play as Bolvi, you get his instrument on the map. And they loved it. And they're like, okay, we get it. This is Bolvi. But it did create some challenges because for the rest of the score, anytime I had to write for him, I had to figure out how to make a contrabassoon be featured, even with everything else going on, which was not always the easiest task.
Right, because of the low frequency, right? Because you have to somehow back everybody off so that the contrabassoon can be heard, right? Exactly.
And, I have a tendency to overwrite. So there's a lot of percussion, there's a lot of stuff going on. So to carve out moments, like you said, to have that come through, it was an interesting challenge, but I think it mostly worked.
It worked. I mean, when I'm listening and prepping for conversations like this, I always, do at least one full listen through start to finish of whatever score I'm listening to. This one I did like 3 or 4, but it's like when I first listened to it, I had my laptop plugged into my stereo and sometimes I'll listen with headphones, whatever, just so I can hear as much of the music as possible. And when that contrabassoon track started, I was like, I was doing something else, but having it play, and it completely caught my attention, because I was like, whatever I was focused on at the moment, eventually my brain started to realize this is not normal.
Not normal, yeah.
Yeah. And it was something like I almost did want to pull out my headset and make sure that I was right, but then, I could tell. But yeah, that's a tough instrument if you want it featured often for that reason. It's just kind of hard to hear.
And I'm wondering what piece it was. It probably was the map piece, which I think is called Feral Lands on the soundtrack.
Okay.
And on the soundtrack, because you can't have the interactive experience, I did a lot of blending, so you'll get both characters' instruments over the course of the track. But it's a contrabassoon not even used as it typically would be. It's playing melodically, which is incredibly unusual, because if it's going to be down there, it's usually just reinforcing bass notes or honking away and doing the comedic thing. So to let it be a noble instrument was really fun.
Yeah, and I bet your dude loved that too, the guy who played.
Absolutely.
And then you featured some flutes and pipes, and did you have an actual uilleann pipes player? I mean, I think you did.
Yeah, not only did I have one, I had the one. He's his name's Eric Rigler. He played all the bagpipes on Braveheart and Titanic, and
wow.
He was, I don't think he was the only one, but he played on How to Train Your Dragon. He's the guy if you want that thing. And I had a little bit of a hard time finding him, but I was asking around, I need an uilleann pipe player. Who should I get? And everyone's like, oh, you got to use Eric. So it was, once I actually got in touch with him, he's a super nice guy who's really helpful. He, at that point, a lot of the parts were written, kind of the same thing with the violinist. It was far enough down the road that a lot of that stuff was in progress. But he sent over this document, and it was pages and pages of, okay, there's different chanters for these instruments, so you can play in these keys and you can't play in these keys. And when you're playing in this key, this is the range that will be in tune. And then after this, it's going to start to be out. But also this weird note in the middle of the scale will also sometimes be out. I can usually fix it. But there's just all of these sort of stipulations and requirements. And thankfully I had done a decent amount of research about the instruments, because so many of these things are diatonic and they only work in one key. And this one, because you can swap out the chanters, you can play in a couple different keys. But there's a lot of forethought that has to go into writing these tracks because of that reason.
Right. Yeah. Lots of rules just because of how the instrument is constructed. Yeah. Crazy.
Which if I wasn't getting it recorded with a live player, it wouldn't matter, because you can fake anything with samples these days. Right.
And how many people are going to call you up and be like, that's wrong? One
totally.
Out of every 2 million people might know. So you've also composed a lot of Fortnite music, and I only bring it up because I know, that's probably a whole separate conversation. You have another really great score video up from a trailer of a new season of Fortnite coming out. And I just loved the brass and all of that in that track, and totally different style than HEROish, right?
Well, the thing about Fortnite is, even from season to season, the music style will vary drastically.
Sure.
So that's sort of the thing that keeps it interesting. Is we did a spy season, we did a more traditional 90s action thing, we did a Marvel thing, we've done, it's gone everywhere.
Yeah, it really has. I've dabbled in Fortnite here and there, and I have a group of local friends who play it constantly, and sometimes I'll hop in on their little party to Fortnite a bit. But I did send your Fortnite playlist to a friend of mine, and I was like, I've played some Fortnite, but not enough to know these songs, this music in context. Do you recognize any of this music? Because Fortnite, while you're actually playing the game, there's no music, right? So it's like in the cinematics and in the storytelling of the game. And she was like, I recognize all of this. And I was like, wow, that's amazing. So there you go.
Well, that's good to hear.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but yeah, talk a little bit about the new season music that you scored, because that's in that spy style, it sounded like.
Well, no,
oh, okay.
That's my latest video, but that
Gotcha.
spy video came out, or the spy season, at least a couple years ago now.
Okay, it's been a minute.
Yeah,
okay.
It's been a minute.
So maybe even the last time I played. No, I'm kidding. I've played since then. But yeah. So with HEROish, you mentioned how there's different areas, and then within those areas, different characters that have different instruments, right? Mm-hmm. So talk a little bit more about the areas, because you kind of touched on it, but I'd like to hear a little more detail about the biomes in the game.
Sure. Let's see. We had early conversations about how they knew they wanted different instruments, but they weren't exactly sure how to do it, right? So there was this question of, is the instrumentation tied to the biome and the faction, or is it tied to the characters? And so we ended up mostly tying them to characters, except that those character instruments then sort of inform, because they belong to one of the factions. So they inform what the larger instrumentation for that area of the game will be. So for instance, you start in the Imperial land, and you've got Flynn is orchestral brass, and then you've got the only character really that's two characters is Ajax and Vega, which is a wolf and a female archer. And so they get two instruments. They get a tenor recorder and a viola, just because it's two of them. So there's some logic there. So the viola becomes the string section, and the tenor recorder just stays as a tenor recorder. And then beyond that, for the Imperial world, we had we had things like timpani and chains and metals and pipe organ and snare drums, and just like more, all the biggest stuff, I guess, and a little bit more traditional. And then you get to Cursed. So we talked about that. We've got Lavinia with her fiddle, and then Marduk with the electric guitar. So that's probably the most Celtic metal out of the three instrumentation sets. There's Bahrain, there's Gittern. I think I used a Gittern on that, which is like a medieval sort of little small string instrument. More strings, but like kind of smaller, creepy strings, pianos, just it's everything, right? And then you get to the feral. So feral, we have spider bait, which was the Celtic flutes, and we had Bolvi with the contrabassoon. And so those plus Eric Rigler playing the pipes makes up a big part of the feral sound. And then it's augmented with lots of shakers and hand percussion and like I said, the sort of stuff you can carry, or the organic stuff. And the other thing that was important about that to me was to keep metal out of that world. So all the metals are pretty much, there's some in the Curse, but it's pretty much for the Imperial. Okay. And I didn't realize where we were going when I was coming up with these things. But they have, when you play the game, there's sort of regular levels, and then there's some special scenarios. And a lot of the special scenarios are when you get close to the end of a campaign, or you're starting a campaign and you've got some overlap between two worlds. So we would do things, it sort of made my job easy because I didn't know this was coming at the time, but because everything was so specific, like there's a level, I can't remember what it's called, but Bolvi and Flynn are fighting. And so you've got the contrabassoon against the orchestral brass, and depending on where you are in the level, you're getting mostly feral instrumentation, or you're getting more of the Imperial stuff start to come in with the snare drums and the chains and the other things. So it just became a really interesting way to tell story without there being much story there to tell.
Sure. Yeah. Just with instrumentation techniques. Yeah. And speaking of, where did you record? Who was that, an LA thing, or was it overseas? What'd you do?
The orchestra was in Vienna.
Oh, cool.
I've done a lot of stuff with them. They're fantastic. We had, I think it was 64 players in Vienna.
Nice.
And then all the soloists, Luann recorded here, but everyone else just recorded on their own remotely.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay.
We're still in COVID.
Yeah, I know. So you stayed at home instead of going to Vienna. Did you do it distance?
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Well, what are you working on right now that you can talk about?
That's always the question, isn't it?
Right.
That I can talk about. I'm still thankfully involved with Fortnite, so there's new stuff coming all the time with that. They keep me very busy. And I'm also working on this game called Marvel's Midnight Suns, which is between Firaxis and 2K is the studio putting that out, which is oddly another sort of metal inspired orchestra score. I swear when I get hired, it's not because of the metal thing, but then somehow once I'm in, they're like, hey, can we add some metal guitar to this? All right, we can do it. That's fine.
You're like, I know
So
how to do that.
maybe they had an agenda and they didn't tell me about it, but it always seems to get there eventually.
Do you ever play? I mean, you didn't play on HEROish, did you?
Oh, I did. Yeah.
You did? Oh, that is you.
All the guitars. I played a lot of like bouzouki and acoustic guitars, and then the metal guitars, me.
Nice.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of the only practice I get anymore is finding excuses to play guitar on things. It just, keeps me playing.
Nice. That's awesome. Well, what more do you want to say about HEROish or anything, really?
Wow, it's a big question.
I know.
I mean, I'd want to just emphasize how thankful I am that Sunblink understood what live music was going to do.
That's the developer, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, it's a mobile game and they're a startup, and I'm sure they're trying to do their cost benefit analysis or whatever startups do and try to figure out where are their resources best spent to put their best foot forward. And for them to understand what spending money on an orchestra and these soloists and what it can do to elevate the game and what it can do to make the score so lively and interesting it's really special, and not everyone gets that. And it was just a pleasure to work with them and for them to be so excited about when I sent them the Luann video or the contrabassoon, and that they just instantly got it, and it was very nice. The way that I think about it is, at the end of the day, video games are basically like animation, right? Like there's no actual live performance there, and some of the new games like Last of Us 2 and some of these things are like they're so close to photorealistic and the performances are so amazing that it basically is like watching a movie. But for the most part, we're still in like animation land. And if you watch any great animated film, there's probably a live orchestra. And not only is there live music, but there's music that goes for it, right? And it's bringing a lot of life to fake images. And so that's how I think about, like, that's why I add guitars on things if I know we're not going to go record and some of the things are going to say samples. Is, to me, if I listen to a mock-up that's just samples, it sounds like sheet music. It sounds like this is what the music will turn into eventually. And so to leave it in that state kind of just, it feels unfinished. And to be able to say, let's get some humanity in here and some life and some rawness and mistakes and all those extra things, I think it's really important to make the game feel more alive.
It certainly does it with HEROish. The game sounds absolutely fantastic. You didn't do any sound design, did you?
I didn't. It was
music. Okay.
Pretty much all done by my friend Mark McBride, and
cool.
he did a fantastic job. And so there was also a lot of back and forth with him just to make sure, like, there's a lot going on in the game when you're playing. There's a lot of troops. There's a lot of stuff on screen. So he's got a lot of stuff going on. The music is very busy, and to find the balance of where we can both exist without stepping on each other's toes was also a big part of it.
Yeah. How much, I guess, are you working with the team in terms of implementation? I mean, I know you're not probably the one actually doing it, but how much are you a part of those conversations?
It depends on the project. With this, we had a lot of conversations about what was going to be the most effective. And, there's not a lot of interactivity with the music. Initially we had some like big, bold ideas of how we wanted to have layers and have all these things come and go. but it just became information overload when you're playing the game, and the music, the player experience didn't benefit from these things happening because the levels are relatively short. There's so much going on, like I said, that you're not paying attention with your brain to that. You kind of just want the music to provide an atmosphere and to tell you that you're having fun, and like give you a little bit of the vibe, but it's not, you don't need it to convey any sort of information about where troops are coming from or anything like that. So we scaled back a lot of the interactive ideas. We kept it, like I said, for the map, where it's depending on which character you're playing as. And some of the longer levels, that we do have some like additional layers and things that come in as you progress through them. And that was just all conversations about where are we going to get the most bang for our buck? Where is it just not going to be effective? And, sometimes you try something and then you play it in the game. It was also really nice. I don't always get to do this, but I had builds of the game on my phone so I could play it, which was nice when I'm writing it, because I could just loop a section on the computer and play the game and try to see, like, does this feel right? But then also, once it was implemented, to be able to play through the game and just see what's working, where we can improve, where we should change things. It was a big part of it.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, I'm sure that you've worked off of just strictly visuals before too, without having that kind of a tool, and that's
visuals
really
if I'm lucky. Yeah,
right.
I mean, sometimes it's a one sentence description. That's all you get.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. Well, the music sounds absolutely fantastic, and I had a lot of fun listening to it. So is there anything else you want to say before we go for the day?
Oh, I don't think so. I think we covered it.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you, Phill, so much for your time today. It was a pleasure listening and chatting with you.
Absolutely. Thank you.